She's in your thoughts every day, but she's not in your life anymore. And that's exactly why this hurts more than you're willing to admit. You're living in a memory, not a reality. And that's the part most people don't want to face. You wake up thinking about someone who isn't there. You imagine conversations that will never happen. You replay moments that only exist in your mind now. And the reason it feels so real is because emotionally, you never left the connection. Your body moved forward, but your mind stayed behind. The pain isn't just missing her. The pain is that the version of her you're attached to no longer exists in your daily world. She doesn't show up in your routines. She's not part of your present experiences. She's not sharing your growth, your struggles, your wins, or your quiet moments, yet somehow she still occupies space in your inner world. And that creates a strange emotional conflict because you're mentally connected to someone who isn't physically or emotionally participating in your life anymore. What keeps you stuck isn't love, it's familiarity. Your mind got used to her presence. It built emotional patterns around her. It learned how to associate comfort, excitement, and meaning with that connection. And when it disappeared, the mind didn't know how to let go. So it recreated her through memory, through imagination, through fantasy, through the highlight reel of what once was. And memories are dangerous because they don't update themselves. They freeze a person in time. You don't remember the distance. You don't remember the silence. You don't remember how the connection actually ended. You remember the moments that made you feel alive. You remember the way she made you feel when things were good. And slowly, that memory becomes more powerful than reality itself. This is why it feels so hard to move on. You're not grieving a person. You're grieving a version of a relationship that only exists in your mind, a version where everything made sense, a version where you felt chosen, wanted, connected. But that version doesn't exist anymore, not in the present, not in her life, not in yours, and yet your mind keeps going back to it. It uses it as emotional comfort, as emotional escape, as emotional identity. You don't just miss her, you miss who you were when you were with her. You miss how you felt about yourself. You miss the meaning that relationship gave your life at that time. So every time you think about her, you're not actually thinking about her. You're thinking about a feeling, a time, a chapter, a version of yourself that felt emotionally complete. And that's why the attachment feels so deep because it's tied to your identity, not just to another person. But here's the truth most people avoid: staying attached to a memory is a form of emotional stagnation. It keeps you loyal to a past that no longer includes you. It keeps you emotionally invested in a reality that doesn't exist anymore. And no matter how strong the feelings are, they can't bring something back that has already moved on. You don't need to erase her from your mind. You need to stop living inside a version of your life that no longer exists, because the moment you accept that she lives in your memory, not your world, is the moment you finally create space for something real to enter your life again. At some point, you start noticing something subtle but powerful. She's not reaching out, but she's not completely gone either. No messages, no calls, no real presence in your life, yet somehow there are signs. She views your story. She likes a post. She appears in places where she knows you might notice her. And that's where confusion begins, because now you're stuck in between hope and reality. This is the emotional trap most people fall into. You interpret attention as intention. You see small digital signals and turn them into meaning. Your mind starts creating stories. She's thinking about me. She misses me. Maybe she's coming back. But watching is not the same as choosing. Observing your life from a distance is not the same as participating in it. When someone truly wants to be in your world, they don't just watch, they show up, they communicate. They make themselves part of your daily reality. They don't stay hidden behind screens and silent curiosity. They step forward. They take emotional risks. They invest energy. And the absence of that effort tells you more than any like view or indirect signal ever could. What's really happening is that she's curious, not committed. She wants to know what you're doing, how you're living, whether you've changed, whether you're happy without her. It's a form of emotional checking, not because she wants to rebuild the connection, but because she wants to measure her impact. She wants to see if she still matters. And that's where your power starts leaking away. Because the moment you start adjusting your behavior for her attention, posting differently, acting differently, living with her in mind, you give her emotional access without requiring real effort in return. She gets the benefit of feeling connected while you stay stuck waiting for something that may never happen. This kind of situation feeds the ego on one side and drains the heart on the other. She gets validation, you get uncertainty. She gets to observe your growth. You get stuck in emotional suspense. And the longer this goes on, the harder it becomes to let go, because now the connection is being kept alive through imagination instead of reality. The mind loves unfinished stories, it hates closure, so it keeps searching for signs. It keeps reading between lines that aren't there. It keeps turning silence into hidden meaning, but silence is already an answer. Distance is already information. Lack of effort is already a decision. Watching from afar doesn't mean she's preparing to return. It means she's not ready to fully disappear, and she's not willing to fully commit either. She wants to keep one foot in the past while walking forward with her life, and that leaves you emotionally paused, suspended between what was and what might be. The real shift happens when you stop reacting to being watched and start focusing on being present in your own life. The moment you detach your emotional state from her attention, the dynamic changes completely. You stop living for a perception. You stop waiting for a curiosity to turn into action. You stop feeding a connection that only exists in your mind, because someone who belongs in your future doesn't stay in the audience. They step onto the stage. And the day you stop mistaking observation for intention is the day you finally reclaim your emotional power. There's a moment that hits quietly, but it changes everything when you realize you're doing most of the emotional work alone. You're the one thinking, remembering, analyzing, hoping, and trying to understand what went wrong while she's simply living her life. And that's when the imbalance becomes clear. The connection exists strongly in your inner world, but barely exists in her external one. This is where emotional attachment turns into emotional self betrayal, not because you cared too much, but because you keep investing energy into someone who isn't matching it anymore. You replay conversations. You imagine what you would say if she reached out. You prepare emotional speeches in your head for moments that may never come. Meanwhile, she isn't having those conversations with you. She's having new experiences without you. The hardest part isn't losing her. The hardest part is realizing that the relationship has become one sided inside your own mind. You're carrying the memory, the meaning, the emotional responsibility of two people while she's only carrying herself. And the longer this goes on, the more your identity becomes tied to someone who no longer plays an active role in your life. That's why it feels exhausting. Not because love is heavy, but because you're holding it alone. When a connection is real and alive, energy flows both ways. There's feedback, there's response, there's shared effort. But when someone drifts away and you stay emotionally engaged, the connection turns into an internal loop. You keep feeding it, but nothing comes back. And over time, that creates emotional burnout, a quiet form of suffering where you feel tired, stuck, and drained without knowing exactly why. What you're actually experiencing isn't missing her presence, it's missing reciprocity. You're missing being chosen, being prioritized, being emotionally met at the same level you're giving. And that's a deeper wound than simple heartbreak because it attacks your sense of worth. It makes you question whether you were ever enough, whether the connection was real, whether you imagined everything. But here's the truth: most people don't see her distance doesn't define your value. It reveals her direction. People move away for many reasons: fear, distraction, new priorities, emotional limitations, but none of those mean you became less valuable. They simply mean she stopped investing. And you don't lose someone by them leaving. You lose yourself by staying emotionally attached to someone who already left. The danger is not that she moved on. The danger is that you didn't. Not physically, but emotionally, you stayed loyal to a connection that no longer includes you. You kept the emotional door open while she quietly closed hers. That's why this phase feels so confusing. There's no clear ending, no dramatic goodbye, just emotional fading. And fading is harder to accept than rejection because rejection gives you a reason to stop. Fading keeps you waiting, but waiting is a choice. And so is letting go. The moment you stop carrying the emotional weight for two people, something shifts inside you. You realize you don't need closure from her. You need honesty with yourself about what is real now, about what is no longer mutual, about where your energy truly belongs, because the real healing doesn't begin when she returns. It begins when you stop living in a relationship that only exists inside your mind. There's another layer to this that most people don't talk about: the way hope disguises itself as patience. You tell yourself you're being calm, mature, understanding. You say things like, I'm giving her space, or I'm not forcing anything, or but if it's meant to happen, it will. But deep down, what you're really doing is waiting for a message, waiting for a sign, waiting for her to come back and choose you again. And hope feels harmless, but in this situation, it slowly becomes emotional paralysis because as long as you're hoping for her return, part of your life stays on hold. You don't fully open up to new people. You don't emotionally invest in new experiences the same way. You keep a part of yourself reserved just in case she reappears, just in case the story continues, just in case you get another chance. So even though you're physically moving forward, emotionally you're standing still. Hope keeps you loyal to a future that may never exist. It turns uncertainty into fantasy. It convinces you that silence means not yet instead of not anymore. And the mind loves this because fantasy feels better than finality. It's easier to imagine a reunion than to accept an ending. But here's what most people avoid facing: if she truly wanted to be back in your life, she would need time to decide. She wouldn't need distance to figure it out. she wouldn't leave you emotionally suspended. Real desire doesn't hesitate, it moves toward what it wants. When someone pulls away and stays away, that's not a pause, that's a direction. The problem is that hope keeps rewriting reality. You start interpreting absence as mystery instead of information. You turn her lack of effort into emotional depth. You believe the connection is still alive just because the feelings inside you are still strong. But feelings alone don't build relationships. Mutual action does. And this is where hope becomes self sabotage, not because it's wrong to care, but because you're placing your emotional future in someone else's hands. You're giving her the power to decide whether you move on or stay stuck, whether you feel chosen or rejected, whether you heal or remain attached. That's not love, that's emotional dependency. The real shift happens when you realize that closure doesn't come from her returning. It comes from you deciding that your life doesn't need her presence to continue, that your growth doesn't require her validation, that your happiness doesn't depend on her choice. And this is the moment where hope transforms into something healthier: acceptance. Acceptance doesn't mean you stop feeling, it means you stop waiting. You stop putting your emotional energy into an imaginary future. You stop negotiating with reality. You let go of what could have been and start investing in what actually is. And that's when something powerful happens. The emotional tension dissolves. The constant mental checking stops. The inner conversation about her slowly fades, not because you forced it, but because you no longer need it. You finally understand that the relationship didn't end because you weren't enough. It ended because she stopped choosing to be part of your present. Eventually, there comes a point where you start feeling a quiet shift inside, not dramatic, not sudden, but subtle and real. You're not thinking about her as often. You're not checking for signs anymore. You're not replaying the past with the same emotional intensity. And for the first time, the idea of your life moving forward without her doesn't feel terrifying. It feels possible. This is the stage where detachment begins. Not the cold kind, but the healthy kind. The kind that happens when your mind finally catches up with reality, when you stop fighting what is and start adapting to it. When you accept that the connection had meaning, but it no longer has a future. And what's interesting is that this is often the moment she becomes more aware of you again. Not because you tried harder, but because you stopped trying. Not because you chased, but because you released. When your energy shifts from attachment to presence, the dynamic changes completely. People are most sensitive to emotional energy when it disappears. When you were constantly available emotionally, thinking about her, waiting, hoping she felt safe taking you for granted, your attention was guaranteed. Your presence was predictable. There was no urgency, no risk, no possibility of loss. But the moment you truly begin to let go, when your focus moves back to your own life, your own growth, your own direction, something changes in the emotional field between you. She may not consciously understand it, but she feels the absence, the space, the difference. And that's when curiosity can turn into reflection. She starts wondering why you're no longer reacting, why you're no longer posting for her attention, why you're no longer emotionally accessible in the same way. And that reflection can lead to a powerful realization that she didn't just lose a connection, she lost a presence, not because you disappeared, but because you stopped being emotionally available without reciprocity. This is why real detachment is so powerful. It doesn't come from pretending not to care, it comes from genuinely choosing yourself again. From rebuilding your identity outside of the relationship, from creating a life that feels full without needing her to complete it. And this is where many people get confused. They think letting go is about making her come back. It's not. Letting go is about freeing yourself from emotional dependence. It's about restoring your inner balance. It's about shifting from I need her to feel whole to I am whole with or without her. Whether she returns or not becomes secondary because now your happiness is no longer tied to her decision. Your emotional state is no longer controlled by her behavior. You're no longer living in reaction mode. You're living in creation mode. And that's the real transformation. Sometimes people do come back when they sense the emotional door closing. But even if she doesn't, something more important happens. You come back to yourself. You stop chasing what left. And you start becoming someone who no longer needs to be chased. The final shift is the one that truly sets you free when you no longer define the chapter by how it ended, but by how it changed you. You stop asking, why did she leave? And start asking, who am I becoming because of this? And that question alone moves you out of loss and into growth. At this stage, you're no longer trying to get her back, prove anything, or recreate the past. You've accepted that the connection had its time, its meaning, and its limits. You see it clearly now, not through pain, not through fantasy, but through perspective. You understand that some people come into your life not to stay forever, but to reveal parts of you that needed to awaken. You learn what attachment feels like. You learn what imbalance looks like. You learn the difference between attention and tension, between memory and reality, between hope and self respect. And those lessons stay with you far longer than the relationship ever did. This is where emotional maturity is born. Instead of resenting her for leaving, you become grateful for the mirror she held up to you. You see where you abandoned yourself, where you waited instead of choosing, where you invested in potential instead of presence. And instead of feeling ashamed, you feel empowered because now you're aware. Awareness is the real closure. You no longer need explanations from her because you understand yourself. You know why you stayed, you know what you were looking for, you know what you were afraid of losing. And with that clarity, the emotional grip loosens naturally. What once felt like rejection now feels like redirection. You start attracting different energy, different people, healthier dynamics, because you're no longer operating from lack or longing. You're operating from alignment, from self trust, from emotional self sufficiency. And here's the most powerful part: you realize that the version of you who needed her no longer exists, not because you became colder, but because you became stronger. You don't seek validation through attachment anymore. You don't look for completion in another person. You don't confuse chemistry with compatibility. You understand now that real connection doesn't feel uncertain, confusing, or emotionally exhausting. Real connection feels mutual, it feels calm, it feels secure, it feels present. And that's why this chapter, as painful as it was, becomes one of the most important chapters of your life because it forced you to grow beyond fantasy, beyond waiting, beyond emotional dependency. It taught you how to let go without bitterness, how to love without losing yourself, how to move forward without needing to erase the past. You don't close this chapter with anger, you close it with understanding. And the moment you do, you realize something simple but life changing. She was never meant to be your destination. She was meant to be your turning point.